Hello, this is Confirmation Bias Part 2, and it's about what psychology discovered studying why intelligent people are perceiving reality from what they think to be objectively and yet come to completely different conclusions. Dr. Stephen Michael here, and this is Clear and Clean Thinking. And for those of you, welcome back. In part 1, we explored why confirmation bias is important and such a natural part of being human. We discussed how belonging to a group, how our identity, acceptance in the group, could even mean our survival. And that's how our brains evolved. We discovered something really important. Confirmation bias is not about intelligence. It's not evidence of weakness. It's not evidence that we're unintelligent. It's evidence that we're human beings. But research psychologists, being research psychologists, they don't just simply accept that. They want to scientifically, using the scientific methodology of research, confirm what seems to be common sense observations. That's what research does. They wanted to know whether confirmation bias could actually be demonstrated scientifically. Could it be measured? Could it be replicated by other psychologists elsewhere? And what they discovered over the past 60 years is really interesting. I could even use the word, it's fascinating. And today I'd like to share with you 3 of those studies I believe beautifully illustrate just how naturally confirmation bias operates in all of us. Not some of us, all of us. Not just you, not just me, including you and including me. Confirmation bias definition is our tendency to notice, to remember, and give greater weight to information that confirms what we already believe. I can't say I always understood this. I didn't understand it, in fact, in terms of how powerful this was. One of the greatest lessons I learned in coming from being an educator and teaching in the classroom. And in part 1, I discussed that experience and that story of my memory. Just as a refresher, I would present information to the class, and there was really small classes, there were very large classes also. And afterwards I noticed that in speaking with students after class, in the classroom or in my office, that there was a difference in what I presented and what they appeared to take in as how they interpreted it, and they filtered it, and they believed some aspects of it, and not. And that intrigued me. How so many students, I think probably all of them, although I didn't speak individually with all of them, didn't take away what I was communicating, not altogether, but in major parts. That experience taught me something I never forgot. Confirmation bias isn't a weakness that affects a few people. It's part of being human. And psychologists have actually demonstrated this in remarkable ways. Here's the first study, study number 1. Peter Wason's Rule Discovery Experiment. British psychologist Peter Wason conducted one of the earliest studies and most elegant demonstrations of confirmation bias. Participants were given a simple sequence of numbers, 2, 4, 6. They were then told there's a rule governing the sequence. Your task is to discover the rule. Perhaps the rule was even numbers, numbers increasing by 2, numbers in arithmetic progression. Once participants developed an idea, a belief, they began testing it. They would suggest sequences as 8, 10, 12, 20, 22, 24, 100, 102, 104. And Wason would respond, yes. That sequence follows the rule. And as the repetition went on, people became increasingly confident. But there was something interesting happening. Most participants only generated examples that supported their existing assumptions. Very few tried sequences such as 1, 2, 3, 3, 7, 9, 10, 20, 30. Eventually, participants learned that the actual sequence rule was surprisingly simple. Any ascending sequence of numbers. That was it. Not even numbers, not increasing by 2, simply numbers that ascended. Wason concluded something profound. Human beings tend to search for evidence that confirms what they already believe, rather than searching for evidence that might prove them wrong. I hope you stay with that thought for a moment, because I find that observation both fascinating and humbling. Because if we are honest with ourselves, many of us, probably all of us, have done exactly that. We search, but we often search selectively. We seek support more than disconfirmation. We seek reassurance more than a challenge to our beliefs. And perhaps one of the first questions we can ask ourselves, what evidence would cause me to reconsider? Or perhaps, what might I be missing? And I would say that that's one of the fundamental questions that will allow us to recognize that we're looking at whatever it is with confirmation bias. And that may be very important to whatever we can do about that realization. Study number 2 was done by Lord, Ross, and Lepper, 1979. Charles Lord, Lee Ross, and Mark Lepper. They conducted a study involving capital punishment. They recruited 2 groups of participants, one who strongly supported the death penalty, and the other group who strongly opposed it. Both groups were then presented with research studies. Some studies suggested that capital punishment reduced crime. Importantly, the evidence was intentionally balanced. The researchers expected participants to carefully evaluate the information. Instead, something remarkable happened. People who already supported capital punishment became even more supportive. People who opposed capital punishment became even more opposed. Each side judged the studies that they agreed with their prior beliefs as more convincing. And each side criticized studies that challenged their existing viewpoint. Same evidence, different conclusions, different realities. This study suggests something very important. People do not simply process information objectively. We interpret information through the lens of our own existing beliefs, our values, sometimes our identities. And the stronger our attachment is to a belief, the stronger our motivation may become to defend it. Over many years of teaching students, mentoring business professionals, I've observed something similar. Intelligent people rarely lack intelligence, by definition. What often happens is that we become emotionally invested in our conclusions. And once our beliefs become intertwined with our identity, reconsidering them can be very difficult. Not because we're foolish, but because we're human. Study number 3 is called motivated skepticism. It's done by psychologists Charles Tabor and Milton Lodge. And they explored another fascinating phenomenon. They discovered what they called motivated skepticism. Participants were exposed to arguments supporting and opposing their existing beliefs. What they found was striking. When people encountered information that supported what they already believed, they tend to accept it quickly, little scrutiny, with little questioning, with little investigation. But when participants encountered information challenging their existing beliefs, guess what? They became highly analytical, highly skeptical, demanding evidence. They became very critical. Who conducted this study? What methodology was used? Can the data be trusted? What are the weaknesses? In other words, we often become excellent attorneys defending our existing beliefs, but perhaps not always equally effective judges searching for truth. Again, this does not make us defective. It just makes us recognize we're human. And understanding this tendency gives us something very valuable, a possible antidote to reducing confirmation bias. Not eliminating it, it's in our DNA. And that is, first step, awareness. Awareness allows us to pause. Awareness allows us to slow down. Awareness allows us to ask ourselves, am I evaluating this information fairly? Or am I protecting something I already believe? As I reflect on these studies, and I hope you do, I find them comforting and yet challenging. Comforting because they remind us that confirmation bias belongs to all of us. Challenging because they invite us to become much more intentional thinkers. And perhaps that leads us to the most important question of all. If confirmation bias, as studies support, is a natural part of being human, can we become better thinkers? Can we become more reflective? Can we learn to think more clearly and also cleanly? That is what I would like to explore with you in part 3, because I deeply believe psychology does more than help us understand the brain. These studies can help us understand ourselves, and perhaps understanding ourselves is the pathways toward living more wisely. And perhaps, or for sure, that is one of the pathways to clear and clean thinking. In our next episode, we'll move more beyond research and explore a question that may be even more important than we've asked. What can we do with this knowledge? Knowledge in its own right, in its own sake, is really boring. Meaning, so what? So I now know something. The question becomes more of, how can we move with this knowledge from certainty to curiosity? And how might that help us think more clearly and more cleanly? And perhaps even more wisely. I hope you'll join me. Bye for now. I thank you. I salute you for being here and taking action.